Well, good morning and welcome to the Free West Media channel. I'm honored to be talking to activist and commentator Unathi Kwaza again. And tomorrow in South Africa is so-called Freedom Day, the national holiday. We used to have a national holiday on 31st of May, Republic Day. We're still a republic, but we no longer have Republic Day. So we thought it could be a good idea to talk a little bit about, are we really free in South Africa? So morning, Unathi, how are you?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? And as I mentioned earlier on, that it's ironic that we are celebrating freedom tomorrow, but we are still under a curfew by the government. So really, are we free in South Africa, or it's just freedom has become just another word in the vocabulary, and yet we do not see. I mean, it's been 27 years already, and that's the time that Nelson Mandela was imprisoned with other people in other prisoners. And I mean, we have a lot to be grateful for 1994 happening in South Africa. At the same time, when we look back, thinking about the poverty that we still see in our country, poor quality education, politicians sometimes will even be naughty and play with race relations in this country, trying to divide people based on their race. So this is where we are as a country, and as much as we have things to be grateful for, but we have more things to be worried about, especially in the past year, when we looked and watched as the government took more and more power to restrict our movements, to infringe upon our freedoms. They remind us all the time that they fought for our freedom, but they take these freedoms for granted. At the same time, South Africans themselves don't seem to be pushing back and demanding that certain things be not be allowed. I mean, I read somewhere that in the past year, 12 months, 32 people were killed by police and soldiers. And without any consequences to them, just because they broke the rules of the government. Government said, don't go here, and police found people. In certain cases, it's just ridiculous. I mean, think about Collins Khoza and the fact that he was in his house when he was killed, I think, by a soldier. And you ask yourself, where is the freedom that they're talking about? So
Yes,
we have a lot of things to think about as a country, because there's just...
Yeah, you're talking now about police brutality, and in fact, a few hundred people die every year in police custody, and nobody says anything about that.
Absolutely.
You know, there's no Steve Biko today. I mean, there have been many hundreds of Steve Bikos, but nobody talks about them.
Absolutely. And it seems to me that, I mean, think about the fact that the media is not talking much about Collins Khoza, but they will talk a lot about George Floyd in the United States of America. And goodness, when you talk about media freedom, but it's, I mean, from where I sit, I saw the media just giving politicians a leeway to just do whatever they pleased, and the media never questioned. It seems to me that they forgot that they too have a right to question what is happening, but they were silent. They silenced themselves because it was not the government that silenced them. SANEF that will talk about, complain about politicians doing what they please with the journalists, but SANEF never even questioned anything. It's like they were told to shut up and they didn't question that. So this is where we are as a country, and we all should be worried about where we are.
Yes, and the economy is not doing all that well either as a result of the restrictions and the confinement and the lockdown. But you mentioned that they are dividing people along racial lines in South Africa, but somehow that's an international phenomenon. You also, you mentioned George Floyd in the US, and it seems that our media are just following in the footsteps of the American media, and they're playing off the racists against one another. You know, it's like fiddling while Rome burns, while the economy is in a shambles increasingly in South Africa, and there's corruption and so on. They are emphasizing racial division, racial conflict in South Africa. Would you agree to that?
Absolutely. I mean, tomorrow, those who will be listening to the president, I have no doubt in my mind that he'll be telling people about how bad white people and Afrikaners are, and how oppressed Black people were and still are, and yet they've been in power for 27 years. If Black people are still mostly affected by poverty, it's because of the ANC. When will they stop blaming apartheid for everything that is wrong in this country? I mean, the way they stole even food that is meant to help people. I mean, the food parcels, they stole that food as well. And why would you blame apartheid then if, I mean, there's an Ipsos research that they gave recently, and it says that just over 50% of South African households do not have food, do not have money to spend on food. That means there's a lot of hunger out there. And politicians will come on Freedom Day and talk about apartheid 27 years later, and they will never admit to their own wrongs. And people should demand better from politicians. I mean, just now we're going again to elections, and we are people going to vote differently, or people are going to vote as usual along the racial lines? And when will people see that whoever they choose to vote for will directly impact them, because it's local government elections? If you haven't had water, let's say for months, other people for years, why would you vote the same people who have not been giving you water? I mean, now we're talking about government importing engineers from Cuba, because as if we do not have engineers in South Africa who have been here, who have experience, and who understand the climate, everything about this country. But government will spend 65 million rands that we do not have on Cuban engineers. It's not the first time that these engineers are coming into the country. We should ask how did it go the last time when they were in Free State? When who's this? Ace Magashile was the premier in the Free State. They had these Cuban engineers. How did it help? Because even today, people of the Free State are still struggling with water. So these are all the challenges. As much as we say that we're in a free country now, but there's a lot of things that are going wrong, and politicians should be held to account for it.
Yes, exactly. So people are, you know, it's almost as if democracy doesn't work in South Africa because people do not actually exercise their power at the ballot box to change things. So they just vote for the same party over and over again. It's almost like a de facto one-party state. And this whole Cuban thing and the way Cuba is held up as a kind of a great country or a great example for South Africa to follow, it really, it's also something that takes us back to the past, back to communism and socialism in Eastern Europe and the pre-1989 era. You know, I've often said that the Berlin Wall hasn't come down in South Africa. It's still there because people are still clinging on to this notion of an ideal egalitarian society that has failed elsewhere in the world. Well, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. The way, I mean, the way that your EFFs, your ANC people cling on to an ideology that failed many years ago, an ideology that led to millions of people being butchered. And we are in a constitutional democracy, but we have political leaders who hold so much influence in society. We have such leaders, I mean, raising their fists and telling us how great Cuba is. And the people of Cuba will tell you differently. The people of Zimbabwe, the people of Venezuela will tell you differently, that socialism, communism, they all failed because there's nothing to them. So South Africa is where it is because of, I mean, think about the tripartite alliance, the fact that there's like South African Communist Party, the ANC and COSATU, they are all hanging on to the idea that Cuba is such a great revolutionary country. And yet Cuba is struggling. Even the 65 million that they say they will spend on doctors, we know that a huge part of that money is going directly to the Cuban government. The doctors that they bring here don't even get the whole money. The doctors, the engineers, it's the same story. It's like money laundering of sorts, or human trafficking, because if you're going to bring someone to a country and not pay all the money that you're supposed to pay them, isn't that what human traffickers do? That's what they do. And it's not, there's no justice in that. It should be illegal to do that. I mean, you as an employer, you'll be told that you cannot use someone's services and not pay them fully the amount of money that you said you would pay them. But government is doing it with the Cuban government. And it's wrong, and not many people are mad about it.
Yeah, exactly. I'd love to see what those contracts look like between, or the agreements between South Africa and Cuba, exactly as you say. The engineers who come here, the so-called engineers, they don't get that money. It flows back to Cuba, to the government in Cuba. And the amazing thing, of course, is that this whole, what would one call it, this Cuban ideology in South Africa, this eulogization of Cuba, or hagiographies for Fidel Castro and so on. It's not only the ruling party that's practicing that, but even some of the Afrikaners are doing that, and some of the Afrikaner authors, such as Marita van der Vyver, she wrote a book not so long ago, I think a year ago, which is partially set in Cuba. And then she said in the interview that Cuba is the last place on earth where communism is still sexy. Can you believe it? That somebody could make a statement like that, And she doesn't even live in South Africa. She lives in France now, but she still sells her books in Afrikaans in South Africa. So she's not suffering from, she's got water and electricity where she is, and she's got a French welfare state looking after her and her children and her family. But here, we're all struggling, and she's giving us moral lessons and saying that Cuba is a sexy communist state.
Unbelievable. Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? You have academics, you have I mean, just now I'm thinking about the professor at UCT, the one who was in the news recently, Lushaba, and he calls himself Commandant something, and it's all tied to this communist. It's like communism, as you just said. This person says that Cuba is the only country in the world where communism is sexy. There's nothing sexy about communism. I mean, these are people, you would think that these are uneducated people, but they're highly educated. And I don't know why they think of the millions that were butchered under these regimes, where it was said that communism. Yes, that's why I do what I do. That's why I talk about the things that I talk about. It is to educate, especially young minds which are highly impressionable. I mean, if you had a professor at varsity who taught you and told you that communism is sexy in Cuba, if you're a young person, you're not well traveled, you're not well read. Some of them do believe these things, and because they look up to these people, and that's why we always have to push back. We always have to raise our voices, all of us. If you think differently about things, I mean, there's always the mainstream media and the other side, and mainstream media will don't want you to question anything. That's why people get called. I mean, if you have any questions about the coronavirus, about COVID, about the lockdown regulations, which have been so draconian, you get called. Even if you have questions about the vaccine itself, they call you an anti-vaxxer. I mean, it doesn't matter what people call you. Just raise your voice if you disagree with something, and do not be afraid to just let people know what you think, because your voice matters. You should not allow anyone calling, just because they call you names, you shouldn't be silenced like that. So it also helps that if we educate ourselves as well, because you can't, I mean, you'll agree with anything. If, let's say, you are a student, if you don't read yourself, if you don't get as many views as possible, you should, I always say that when I stopped watching CNN, BBC, all these mainstream media people, I got other resources and other voices to actually understand what is happening in the US, because what happens in the US affects all of us, because they are a powerhouse. So it's important to understand the politics in the US. So for me, I felt that when I stopped watching all these big names in the media, that's when I actually got to hear what exactly is happening here. Because you find South African media, for instance, following everything that CNN is saying, or BBC, or Sky News, or Al Jazeera are saying. And it's usually propaganda information, and they will never tell you the other side of the story. So it's your responsibility to get as much information as possible, so that you are able to make up your mind. You should not be fed propaganda by anyone. You get as many views as possible on anything. Don't let people tell you that, oh, that one is a racist, I can't listen to them. Oh, that one, yes, that's the person that you should listen to. No, don't do that. Otherwise, you're not doing justice. You're not doing justice to who you are. If you just follow what the head is saying, what the tribe is saying, and more importantly, don't let people. I know that it's not easy to speak out, especially if you know that you're probably the only person thinking this way. You would think that you're the only person, but in truth, there's always a lot of other people thinking, but in certain ways that other than what the media is saying. But some people are afraid. Some have to protect their jobs, so they can't. I suppose on social media, for instance, they can't talk about certain things, or share certain views, or be seen to be anti what government is saying. I mean, I questioned from the start the lockdown regulations, and I was never supportive of them, because to me it didn't make sense that you can tell someone in Khayelitsha to social distance. how do you social distance someone, let's say, who's in an informal settlement? How do you tell a person you have to wear a mask? Some people are so poor that they have to choose between buying a mask and buying a loaf of bread. So how do you make such decisions on behalf of the people? It doesn't make sense to me that you can be so draconian and not think of people's conditions, where people are in their lives, and you think you are protecting people from COVID-19. It didn't make sense to me. That's why I've always been talking against what the government is saying. And it didn't matter to me that people are saying, oh, you want people to die and all that. But no one is like, let's say, there has not been mass death, for instance, in Khayelitsha, just because people are not wearing masks, most of them. So, and for me, it has always also been about them. You cannot tell me that the ANC government knows what's best for your health as a family, as a father, like a father of a household knows less than what government thinks. It doesn't make sense to me. So the only lesson for me from the lockdown is that people need to trust themselves more than they trust politicians, and people need to stand their ground. People, I mean, you can just follow just because Cyril Ramaphosa says this. You just follow. Cyril Ramaphosa says you should. They should feel that cigarettes should be banned. So Ramaphosa doesn't think of the people who actually make the cigarettes, that it's the loss of income to them. When they ban liquor, it's loss of income to someone. It's loss of business to someone. When they close restaurants and say that liquor shouldn't be served at restaurants, it's loss of income to someone. So how is that more important than not catching COVID-19? Which, by the way, is highly, I mean, most people recover from COVID-19, but most people will not recover from losing their jobs, their businesses, because of the state of the economy in South Africa. So these are the things that people should always have in mind. We should celebrate Freedom Day knowing what freedom actually means for us.
Great. Well, that's a...
I mean, there's nothing wrong with questioning what government says. Don't listen to what media is telling you. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Exactly. So we're actually, if I had to summarize what you're saying, we create our own freedom, and we don't get it from government or the ANC.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Unathi. That was an interesting discussion, and as ever, it's very refreshing to talk to you and to hear your free-spirited views. And to our viewers out there, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and until next time, goodbye.